Alright, 30 Years War. This is the Decision Games reprint. Oh, what to talk about here. So, I mean, obviously, to begin with, it's a very, very light treatment of tactical battles. They even call them tactical operational or operational tactical, something along that lines, to kind of indicate, hey, what you're playing here is really about the same kind of system as you'd use in an operational game. There are some real oddities about this game, though. It's kind of derived from, I guess, the Napoleon at Waterloo and all the games that kind of came from that. There was a Napoleonic Quad, which I assume is kind of similar to that. Something about Breitenfeld, in particular, which is why I bought this, always has drawn me back in a way that the Napoleon's Art of War and Napoleon at Waterloo haven't. Those are interesting little games. They're almost like playing an operational game in and of themselves. Just, you know, you've got these locking zones of control, and you're learning all the tricks that you need in an operational game. But it's being done at a tactical level. You'd think this would be similar, but it's not. And for the reasons that it's not is why I enjoy it more and why I come back to Breitenfeld as opposed to Dresden, Eylau, or, well, I don't have Napoleon at Waterloo anymore. I gave my copy away. Maybe gave 2 copies away, I'm not sure. Anyway, there are some significant differences in this game. One of them is the lack of zones of control. Well, the lack of effect on movement. And I know I kind of harshed on that in Breitenfeld, and some of it feels very silly. So I can just charge a unit, you know, right through the enemy. However, in the case of cavalry, the tendency of the infantry to form squares in the face of cavalry was great enough, or at least hedgehogs. We didn't really have squares at that point. Not the same level of drilling. At least they'd form the hedgehogs, and it meant that the cav could largely just ride right by those things. So if there's a hole in the line, if you don't have an anchored line, it kind of makes sense to let the cav slip through. What about the infantry? Sometimes they feel a little too mobile, a little too able to exploit breaches. On the other hand, a lot of what the game shows isn't that different from if you step back a little bit from musket and pike and saw the same kind of situation. If you allow a break in your line and you don't have a reserve, units can kind of flow through it. Disorganized units, etc., hold the line just fine. Sort of. They cause weaknesses in the line where you can maybe get that punch through capability. But the enemy basically has to reform the line. What's kind of funny in this, now how long are these turns supposed to be? It doesn't tell you. Let's see if the scale is discussed here. SPI games usually discuss scale, and they do here. About 45 minutes of time, as opposed to, say, I think 20 minutes in the musket and pike. It just feels like there's too much capability to move in any direction. These infantry formations, and I would say the same with the linear formations even when you get up to the age of Frederick the Great, couldn't turn on a dime the way they can here. They've got all around facing. There's no effect of any of that. It feels funny. It feels like there are some real issues with the armies being just a little too mobile. Part of me wants to say that that's the no locking zones when you're moving. In fact, no effect at all. But part of me is saying, no, it's just not taking things like formation, or formation to some extent, but facing primarily, into effect with these almost phalanx-like formations that just couldn't wheel around easily. How much should that affect a Napoleonic game as opposed to this? I don't know. To some extent, your Napoleonic and your Civil War quad games probably suffer from the same kind of effect. The other weird thing you have in here is these artillery pieces, which can shoot across the map. Now again, my ability to understand scale doesn't work too well, but 175 meters per hex. And I can shoot, 20 hexes away. That sounds like a lot. Is it with significant effectiveness? Well, I don't know. I've got a 1 in 6 chance of hitting, of doing a real significant effect to the enemy unit. So I can use artillery pieces, positioned across the map to have some effect on anything. I'm trying to think about that 175 yards. That's a lot of distance per hex. Or not meters, sorry, not yards. That's a decent amount of distance there. Essentially close to the yards. So it feels like these guns maybe have too much range. Now these are your heavy artillery that come with the army. But they still feel a little too potent across the distance, especially where they're positioned on a hill and can shoot over, your units that are below them, at least up to a certain range. I don't know. They get devastatingly effective as you get close to them. It doesn't seem like it, hey, I can just disorder. But no, I got a 66% chance of knocking the enemy's unit into a position where it's basically able to be destroyed. There's no interaction of the cav and the artillery and the infantry arms. No real great feel for that in the way that there would be in musket and pike. So that's kind of a loss. I mean, you lose a lot of detail here. You don't really get to see what's going on. But on the other hand, in musket and pike, you're a level higher in detail as well, where you can't really see the difference between the tercios and the Dutch style of warfare. So, you've got to kind of accept that level of abstraction above musket and pike, and likewise with musket and pike you have to say, well, there's another level below that I'd really like to still see with the formations. For what this brings as a game, it's interesting. For what it brings as a simulation, it's a little bit less exciting than I'd want. But I'm not sure. When I look at something like Elau Dresden, they came up with a set of rules to expand the detail a little bit. And it really just broke the game in the sense that, if I want to play a detailed simulation at the level, at the tactical level for the Napoleonic Wars, that isn't the game I'm going to grab. Just like this is not the game I'm going to grab for any kind of detail on this. The problem is that you've got some weird kind of stuff going on in the maneuvering that you just look at and say, that just doesn't make sense. You've got these weird kind of mouths running around and encircling the enemy, and then the enemy pulls out and is able to run away and come back with their own forces and encircle whatever they were attacked with. And it feels just way too much like this ultra fluid battle. It's kind of cool to watch, it's fun to play maybe, but it's not at all historical. And once you get to that point of silliness, sort of, whatever there is that is historical about it, whatever I'm talking about, there's something kind of cool about the fluid zones, that applies maybe more here than to the Napoleonic era, and that I see sometimes reflects reality. Well, it just can break reality so badly that what you've got here is a fun little, 30 Years War themed game, but not a really good simulation. Is it a war game? Yeah, it's a war game. I think for its time period it was trying very hard to simulate. What about the reprint? Well, Decision Games is going to screw anything up. Graphics wise, you can see the hills. They look like crap compared to what Breitenfeld had. At least they kept the positional things, but they may have screwed up further in terms of either the units or the positions on the map. When they did their own, when they did White Mountain, they decided to use NATO symbols on it, and it's just kind of garish to me compared to the sort of italic looks on this. For the counters, the other big thing that they did, well, I've never liked these kind of bold numbers that Decision Games put out. I remember they showed up in the game 30 Years War, the same kind of the printing of the image of the counter that really isn't very well done in terms of there's no detail on that image, but it's got color and it looks kind of cartoony in a way, more so than some other designs. And then those big block numbers, man, those really turned me off, although maybe with my eyesight I should be thankful for them because I can at least read them. The rulebook itself, I suspect, is almost a pure transcription of, a reprint, but blown up a little bit for easier on the eye reading. I know that it's much easier with my old... See, when I'm wearing my contacts, I've got a little bit of farsightedness coming into play here. So it's tough for me to read things now. With my glasses, I'm okay, but I'm looking forward to a dotage of being nearly blind in all ways. My eye doctor told me I can look forward to cataracts, that I'll have vision again. But one thing that's not Decision Games' fault at all is this decision, and I went over it in Reprint, however you want to pronounce it. I'm not French. I will never be French, no matter how much my heritage might suggest it somewhere. When I went over that one, I kind of discussed this a little bit, which is that there's a couple of rules that throughout this whole series are almost precisely the same, but don't quite hit it. And there's almost no specific rules in this. It's like they singled out a few things. Each designer decided to take their own take on cav charges. And they aren't very different. They could have put that in the general rules and then used like a line to differentiate each designer's difference in the specific rules. Demoralization levels, they've shaken those up a little bit. I kind of wish they had settled on one system. Whether or not they wanted to divide the different types. I know it screwed me up over on Nordlingen, which was my favorite battle over on the musket and pike, and in this it just ended up with invulnerable armies because I didn't understand what they were saying. It's a couple of columns of a rule that mostly is the same as the others, but it didn't seem like it because it only mostly was the same. Other than that, Reprint has the increased leader effectiveness, and it's only optional. And if you add the command control optionals, it starts to shake the game up a little bit more. It makes things a little more interesting, and I actually think it may have a historical basis on it. How accurately these hold to the historical basis, I'm not certain. But it seems like the designer of Reprint especially wanted to do something more than this system asked for. notably, it's actually a female designer. There aren't a lot of wargame designers that are female. I don't remember if J.L. Roberts was doing quads, and it may be this one that he was saying he thinks it's the first female designer to show up with a published game. I doubt that that has any particular effect. I think what we're seeing here is just someone who really, really wanted a more detailed wargame in an SPI tradition, and probably was told, no, there just aren't enough rules. She gives some hints, though, as to if you want to try to implement those rules yourself. For the increased leader, let's see, it's a watered down version of the morale rules originally envisioned. They were looking at moving only leaders within the area of effectiveness, so actually having a real command radius, like they do in later games, like Terrible Swift Sword. And they also were looking at a pulsed movement with highest leadership value moving first in each army and then moving units for the next highest rated leader, etc. So first of all, the players would be moving together, and then there would be a joint combat phase. Now, this wasn't completely spelled out in the rules, but you can see someone designing this, the designer for this was already looking towards the kind of things that have become much more popular in a much, much later era. That's the kind of stuff you start seeing in, Men of Iron, or in Musket and Pike, where it's not a pure I go, you go system. And it's kind of strange to see, what was obviously a very, very prescient designer that I've never seen anything else from her. That's kind of a pity, Probably people said, no, that's too complicated. I could see Dunnigan shutting that down right away, No, that's too complex. You're a new designer, you can't do that. Get a couple games under your belt. And really being turned off from that because, you come in with these great ideas and, well, just being told no. Overall, what do I think? Well, first of all, my understanding is the original one, Freiburg, was considered a broken battle, one that just didn't work. In this one, you get all 4 battles are workable and fun. How balanced are they? Maybe too balanced. They kind of felt a little bit like, well, White Mountain may be the least balanced of the bunch. The Protestants have a hard shot at that, I think, unless you can add some restriction which isn't in the game to really force the Catholics to attack head-on up those hills. If they did that, it would be an iffier and more interesting battle in a sense. I did this whole maneuver thing because I don't know, I'm too clever to look at that and say, yeah, let's just charge up there and overwhelm them and show them what we can do. There's no incentive to do that. There's just this sort of, well, that's what happened historically, so maybe you should, feeling about it. But yeah, I think you've got 4 reasonably balanced battles. Well, 3 reasonably balanced battles. And none of them felt terribly bad. Nice light system. Probably a good introduction. See, the problem is it breaks so many of the concepts of wargaming already for such a simple game. It's breaking the rigid zone of control. It's breaking, well, it's got this kind of shooting artillery and not just, hey, I can lob shots 1 hex beyond where I am over your head. It's not, it's real line of sight in there. Very simplified, but real. this weird sort of disruption and recovery mechanism. All the things that probably drew me back to it are the things that make it maybe not such a great first war game, because these are not ideas that you're going to see in a lot of other games as you work your way towards sort of, the more detailed tactical stuff. As an operational stepping stone, I don't think it's as good as, say, Napoleon or Waterloo would be. But as something that you're going to probably still enjoy later on, at least if you're like me, I mean, Breitenfeld is certainly one of my favored lighter war games, along with Raffia, the GDW one. That's kind of a neat little tactical light war game. But that's a little less light in some ways. It's got like different unit types that have significant different effects. So yeah, I can definitely recommend this one if you can find it. This is probably the cheaper version to find. I know I have been kind of looking for the quad for a while, and I think I broke down and paid around $20 for this. So, with four battles in it, you're getting $5 a battle. That's about as cheap as you can get in the used market for anything reasonably decent these days. All right, pick those.